Hello everyone, welcome to What's Missing. Today we'll be talking about President Trump's decision to use the Department of Homeland Security as a weapon to subdue the Portland protests. Now the question we have to ask ourselves is, did these protesters bring a federal crackdown upon themselves? Are some major news outlets correct in describing the Portland protesters as criminals, anarchists? Well, based on what I've seen, we need to consider the fact that a protest of any kind is always going to attract a variety of different people, good and bad. That said, just because there are groups who use the protests as a way to commit crime, not all protesters are criminals. Some of these people are your neighbors, your family, your friends. And even if you don't know anyone from Portland, even if you think the city is just a denizen for left-wing corruption, it's still a city like any other. The people follow their daily habits like anyone else, buying their coffee in the morning, going to work, then spending the time they can with the people they love. They have opinions on their favorite sports team, their favorite food, favorite top 3 TV shows. They are not all collectively outside of the system that you are familiar with. They are not all criminals. They are not all terrorists. With that in mind, it sounds crazy to me when right-wing news outlets treat the protests like some terrible looming threat over our democracy. A threat that, in reality, is over-exaggerated. Take this clip for example, the flaming pig head that's become a major talking point in conservative media, showing just how out of control Portland has become. Whoever lit that pig head on fire, on top of an American flag, clearly has some opinions about this country. Whatever those opinions might be, they do not reflect the entire city of Portland. They don't reflect every sister and father among the crowds. Now I do believe criminality should be punished. Whoever launched those fireworks at a federal courthouse should be held accountable for their actions. These actions represent the individuals responsible, of course, but they don't represent everyone. The Portland protests, like any other, are a mass of different people with different beliefs. The only consensus is the police need to change in some fundamental way. Instead of listening to that basic argument, though, media outlets like Fox have decided to label all of them, collectively, as unacceptable. This narrative they've chosen to follow, it pales in comparison to the harsh, real evidence of real terrorism in America, conducted by right-wing extremism. Groups like the KKK have used terrorism far more often than all other U.S. extremist movements combined, and yet they're given little attention by conservative media. Instead of the actual terrorists being exposed for who they are, Trump and the DHS are calling our veterans just a bunch of anarchists, even if all they're doing is standing in a wall to protect the crowds. According to Fox, average American mothers are the real threat, even if they're just holding hands around a courthouse.
Well, first we got a group of vets. So we got a group of Oregon vets. We're going to see You're out here wasting your time. Take it.
It's really telling that whenever somebody provides evidence of right-wing extremism, the conservatives I know respond that the left wing is causing just as much trouble. As I've already stated, this is not true, but it doesn't really matter. How could the truth matter if someone is unwilling to accept it? Right-wing extremism just doesn't match up with their narrative. It breaks the idea that left-wing protests are the real extremists. This tells me that the people who hate protesters altogether don't care who lit that pig head on fire. They don't care who shot those fireworks at a courthouse. They only care that it happened during a protest, and because of that, they believe every protester is responsible. People on the left wing can be violent, certainly, but the data shows us that right-wing extremism is the main culprit of terrorism in the US. The average person joining these protests is not a terrorist or extremist of any kind. The average citizen just wants their voice heard for the afternoon, without explosions, without police brutality.
To the south or to the west. Failure to do so could subject you to arrest or use of force. You're a fucking asshole! What the fuck is wrong with you?
That was a video of a journalist being held against a van. Let's see what it looked like from his perspective.
This event is still an unlawful assembly. You need to disperse to the south or to the west. Failure to do so could subject you to arrest or use of force.
Get out of the street! Move! Sidewalk down the street!
This event is
On the
still an
sidewalk!
unlawful
Get off the
assembly.
sidewalk!
You need to
Hey!
disperse to the
What's your
south
fucking
or
badge
to the
number?
west. Failure to
That
do
was
so
officer
could
number
subject you to arrest or use of force.
What the fuck? You're a fucking asshole! What the fuck is wrong with you? Helmet's right here, bud. Here. There you go. You alright? Here. Here, I got it. Keep going. Here, take the knee. I got it.
Now, I find this interesting because Federal Protective Services and Portland PD were instructed by the state to not target journalists. But what do? They target them anyway, without a care for the fact that by breaking the law, the police themselves are displaying some level of criminal behavior. The state of Oregon issued new restrictions regarding the use of tear gas. But guess what? The police disobeyed these regulations immediately, using tear gas to such an excessive extent, Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler called it an egregious overreaction, admitting this was certainly not a de-escalation strategy. If the police don't follow the rules, how can anyone expect the people to? The more footage I watch, the more obvious it becomes that federal agents are not just protecting the courthouse.
We need a safe area to operate. Do not come up on our back.
This is not just about federal property. The FPS are clearly using the protests as an excuse to display a clear, simple message. Don't even think about gathering unlawfully, or you will be arrested and probably hurt along the way. You will be met with force, even if you have not committed a crime, even if you're just running away. A job like this is perfectly suited for Federal Protective Services, an agency under the DHS. Of their 15,000 employees, 13,000 are hired contractors, and when they were sent to Portland, they made it clear that they have no problem using excessive force against a crowd, no matter what laws they break along the way. Unfortunately for the FPS, Their use of unmarked vans to arrest people has only encouraged greater mistrust and resilience among the city of Portland. Not only are they fighting police brutality, but now they face an unidentified federal law enforcement that will not provide your Miranda rights. They will not issue a warrant, and they will not use or rely on probable cause. This is why federal contractors are being called secret police, because just like the Gestapo, the Cheka, the KGB, they do not follow basic law enforcement procedure, and they don't care if anyone complains. When the law becomes a tool for arresting people without pretense, when the law becomes a mockery of the justice it's supposed to serve, people are going to lose faith in it. The more our law enforcement relies on violence to create order, the more protesters are going to resist, no matter the city, no matter the town. When the FPS finally left Portland, it should be no surprise that there was a stark decrease in violence in the city. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows yet. State and local police deserve their share of the blame for instigating violence in these protests. The departure of the FPS can be taken as a sign of progress, however, that the question of what the state and federal government can get away with is slowly being tested. But for the BLM protests, the actions of federal agents and federal contractors have always been part of the discussion, acting as just one aspect of how the people desire law enforcement to operate in the future. Sooner or later, the flaws of our institutions will have to be acknowledged and reflected upon. The departure of the FPS has given people hope that freedom of speech will continue to fight on, that the FPS were defeated not with violence, but by exposing their willingness to abuse the authority we've given them. There will always be people who break the law, people who choose to steal the personal details of police officers, a process called doxing. These actors must be punished. But how can we enforce the law when state and federal agencies are just as willing as anyone else to break it? How can criminality be ignored among the police when it's used against the people every day? The fact is, if the police wish to uphold the law, they must become its instrument. They must serve the law no matter where they are, how they feel, or whose side they're on. If the police want us to trust them, they have to earn it. And right now, there is no faith in American justice. Well, that's all for today. I hope this video gave you something to think about in these difficult times we're living in. I hope you're doing well. You're welcome to comment with any sources or criticism you might have, and I hope I get to see you guys next time. This has been What's Missing.